put this in. Okay. So, hi, Binay.
Hey, Archana, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for joining in. I think, first of all, thank you. It's a Wednesday evening, and I think a lot of us who are in the corporate world, you've taken out time to be here, so really, really appreciate that. Yeah. Now, I think we have one more person. Hi, Samir.
Hello, Archana. How are you? Hello, everyone.
Hi, hi.
Hi.
I think so. I'm just going to start the screen sharing. I think what we're doing today is something which is so core, definitely as an ICF competency, and also something, which we do day to day, within our personal lives and our professional lives. And I think from a coaching context, obviously, it becomes even more critical. Yeah. So I think what will help is all of us are coaches here. We understand the competency to a large extent. So I think if we can make it conversational, more like talking our experiences with this competency, what's worked for us, what's not worked for us. And I think if we look at it in that lens, I think that's the way I am looking to kind of go through this session, because I think as coaches, most of us are ACC, PCC coaches here. So we've kind of, experienced this. We do this day in and day out. And that's the way I want to kind of set this up for our conversation today. It will be brief. I don't have a very extended presentation, right? So I think if we look at this, yeah, and the competency 6 in the entire competencies, it just doesn't say listening, and it says listens effectively. Yeah, and I think when I looked at this quote, I really thought it resonates with the competency, because I think one of the things that as coaches we do when we are listening is we are showing curiosity. Yeah, we can call it passionate curiosity, positive curiosity. And I think sometimes when I look at it, I think I can use another one, which I, say, you're being very purposefully curious. If I look at it from an umbrella term, that's how I look at this competency. I'm happy. What do others feel? This is what I feel about this competency. How do others look at it? At a very larger lens.
Okay, so I think the most important need of a human being is to be heard, what I feel is, and to be understood. So if we are giving that ear to someone, I think we are doing a great job. And purposefully, as you say, because in coaching context, we are definitely working on some goal, some purpose is there, right? So I think that makes it more profound when you say purposely when I'm listening. So that is even much better way to express listening actively. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone wants to contribute to what Renu just said? I mean, yes, it is all about being curious. And of course, when we say curiosity here, we don't mean interrogation. Yeah, we're not interrogating with the client, but and that's why we say, you're doing it very genuinely, very authentically. It looks that you really want to listen to what the client is saying. Yeah. Now, that gets me to at a very broad level. I think we all know this, but I think it'll be good to know from you guys, how do you look at these 3 levels and what's happening at each level? Because all of us have experienced this. This is one of the core competencies, which is pretty much we are engaged in throughout in our conversations. So any thoughts on how do you look at these levels and what's happening at each level? Anyone? So what is level 1 for you guys?
If it says that we are going by what the words the client is using?
No. So Renu, when I say that, these are levels of listening coaches can engage in. So now we are talking about it more from a lens of a coach.
Okay.
then when I'm trying to listen, I can listen at any one of these 3 levels,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And there is a reason why I put this here, because I think if I asked all of us as coaches, I think a lot of us would say, yes, we listen well. But if you ask me, when I started my journey as a coach, I was clearly at level 1. Yeah. And that's a good level to start with, but it's not the best level to be at and stay there, right? So level 1, if I was to kind of put it in other words, is when you're doing internal listening. You're only listening, you're listening with an agenda, you're listening to your own thoughts, own biases. Yeah, the client is speaking. Yeah, I'm doing selective listening, partial listening, but I'm not 100% there. I am distracted. And when I started out in my journey, this was the level I largely used to operate at, right? And I think to a great time till I was an ACC, initial practice, I was still at level 1 listening. And I think only when I was listening to other calls, other coaches, I started to make some conscious attempts to move to the others. So anyone wants to share their experience with this level? I mean, that's where I started out. And what's happening at the other levels also, we will look at it. But anyone wants to share their experience at level 1. How was it for you in those conversations?
So, Archana, I'll go.
Sure.
For me, first level of listening is more to do with, downloading, I would say. Yeah, and that is the most basic one, and it only occurs when the individual is familiar with and or what is being told, or therefore, only listening confirms to what they mostly already know, right? And the current opinion, which is not likely to change. So that's why I'm calling it downloading. And everything they hear is being projected into one preconceptions. So whatever I have a conception about, it is just getting on top of it, right? About the situation, and is actually reflecting the past experience that I have, and I'm trying to correlate it to the present moment. So for me, that is level 1 listening, I would say, is I would describe it in that way.
And Samir, when you were sharing this, are you talking more as a lens of a coach when you're listening? That's how you're listening at level 1?
Yes.
Yeah.
As a coach, as an individual. So what I do is, what is the information which is coming in? It's a rough information about which I am privy to by virtue of my experience in the past, right? And that's why I'm calling it, that it's downloading. I know what is coming.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's see this picture. And is there any correlation you can draw between this picture and the levels that I've spoken about? So clearly we are saying as coaches, we need to be anything between level 2 and level 3 and not level 1. So where would you put this picture? Can you relate it to any?
So if I go back, for me, then it becomes 4 levels. So one becomes downloading, second becomes more to do with, what you call is as factual listening. Yeah. Which involves is something like, having an open mind and without any prior judgments or presumptions that I carry with me. Yeah. And so it is being more attentive to new ideas which are coming in, the data which is coming in. Yeah. And I'm trying to do a differentiation between what I know and what I'm hearing. Yeah. So that is for me the second level, which is more factual in nature. And the third level, then where I reach here is that empathetic listening. Yeah. And when I have to get more deeper level of listening and and I need to be at a level of a particular level of emotional intelligence, I would say, if I can use that. And this is the basically here I'm in the ability to truly connect with the individual who is being listened to, and to see the world from their perspective. Yeah.
Sure.
So this is where I come in. So I've just put in factual listening because I started with downloading. Second is factual, and third is empathetic.
Yeah. Sure, sure. No, you're absolutely right. Now, if you know, there are many layers to listening. Yeah, there are many levels we can look at. So what I put there is largely, when we look at, especially from a coaching lens, right, we can all have our own interpretations of how we listen. And I'm sure we're all doing that already, right? But this is more at, when I'm at level 1, it's eternal listening. I am largely focusing, it's on my agenda, right? And that's where I am. And it's not getting me beyond a point with my client, right? And when I look at this picture, I think what we are trying to say here is that to really understand the inner world of the client, right? If I continue to stay at level 1, yeah, which is very agenda focused, you're not really listening, you're distracted with your own thoughts, right? You won't really get in. And to be a master, or to get mastery in listening on this competency, right? I need to graduate from that level 1 to move to level 2 and a level 3. So I think that's the way I look at this, Samir and the others. Yeah, happy to hear anyone else has a thought on this when you look at this slide. And that's why it says you won't get in. You will be there, you're listening, but if I really need to go to the inner world of what my client is really all about, right? That is when I have to explore a lot more deeper, yeah, which gets us to level 2 and level 3. Now, so this model is not by me. So it's a very common model by Coactive Coaching Institute, and it's considered to be at higher levels in terms of that's how they look at the entire listening competency. Yeah. Now, level 2 is what is defined as focused. What you say is very focused listening. Right? So I think what comes to mind when you look at that? How do you define level 2? And when you're sharing it, it'll good to know how are you seeing it different from level 1?
I'd like to say that at level 2, you're actually stopping your internal listening completely, your level 1 completely, and you're focusing on what the other person is saying. So there's a clear distinction made there. And until us coaches get to know about level 1, level 2, level 3, we don't even realize that there is this very thin line between internal listening to your own thoughts and focused listening. So, and at level 3, it goes even beyond. So, the fact that we can be conscious that we are at level 1 while we are having a conversation, or whether we are at level 2 while having a conversation, actually helps us to switch off one and switch on the other. That's my take on this, and it's actually given me a lot of insight into how one can get into focused listening versus entertaining your own thoughts, which is so easy to do, and you can so easily slip into it without even realizing it.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Suresh. And, of course, I'm a facilitator, so are some of us. So, right, listening is something we all know, and all of us listen. But, pretty much at level 1, a lot of us are, at least I used to listen with an intent to reply. And I'm being absolutely open about it. When I started this coaching journey, at level 1, I got to know later this was level 1. But what I would be doing is I would be probably dying to ask my questions because it was my agenda. Yeah, this is what I want to ask my client. And sometimes I ended up speaking over them, or sometimes I ended up interrupting them. Yeah. But as awareness for me set in through my course, by speaking to other coaches, listening to my calls, I made a very conscious attempt to move from that level to coming to level 2, where I started focusing on the client. Yeah. And I think this is also a level where you are not getting distracted by anything. So one other thing which I started doing when I, moved to this level of listening was I started making some key notes. Yeah. Now, initially it worked for me. Initially, the note taking worked for me because it was not possible for me to remember everything what the client was saying. And I think I realized somewhere in the journey that now even note taking is becoming a distraction. So I stopped taking notes because that was distracting me. And I wanted to be fully be with the client. And I would make a very, very hard conscious attempt to put all my energies in terms of listening to what the client is really saying. So, and in my world, I think I was operating at that level 2 listening. But Suresh, I agree with you. And there are times it's very hard to continuously be at 2 and 3. We're only human. And there were times in conversations, it happens sometimes even now, but that frequency is very rare, where I move from where I'm actually moving from a level 2 back to level 1. Something on the call is distracting me. Yeah, there is some inner thought which is disturbing, and all of that starts to happen. So I don't know how does it play out for the others. Anyone, Kapil, Samir, anything. I mean, this is level 2 still, where it's a little more focused. Nothing is distracting you. Yeah, you're completely with the client and trying to go really deep to understand what are they trying to share with you.
So for
I just
me,
wanted
look
to
at,
check if everybody is aware of level 1, level 2, and level 3.
Yeah, I think, Suresh, I think that's what I was trying to get at. I mean, I'm presuming everyone understands this.
Okay, great.
Samir, you were saying something.
so yeah, so the corollary to what you said is that the outcome of this level of listening is that the opinion or the views that I get on a situation is altered by the new information which is coming in, right? What you spoke about is the level in which you transitioned, right? I'm talking about more from the information side. On what I know, something gets on top of it, right? And my opinions and my views about a situation gets altered, tend to get altered. Yeah, and I accept it.
Yeah, possibly. And what could also happen here is, Samir, new information is coming in. Yeah, but I'm not going back and still questioning the client on that or kind of making an observation around that. But I'm still seeping all of that in. I have noticed it. I've either made a note of it or it's gone in my mental this thing. Definitely that is happening at level because it's a very focused listening that you're doing with the client. Yeah. Now, what is level 3? Because that is the highest level, and good people who have really, I think coaches, let me say coaches who have really mastered this competency well, largely operate at this level. I'm going to be honest, I'm still not at level 3. I am between 2 and 3. Some calls 3 comes out beautifully. Some calls I'm still between the 2. So anybody wants to take a shot at what is level 3? And I just want to, before that, I just want to give you a hint of this is what's happening at level 3. So I think we've all seen this, right? So if you had to relate it to level 3, what comes to mind there?
So here I think it, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead,
no,
please.
you go ahead. No. The second time I'm interrupting. Go ahead, please.
Well, no, so I'm not sure if what I'm saying relates to the iceberg model, but at level 3, one goes beyond focused coaching into standing in the shoes of the other person and feeling what the other person is feeling. So level 3 is empathetic listening, and so you feel what the other person is feeling, their pain, their pleasure. You're dancing in the moment with the other person. And that does happen in coaching as well. That's probably as close to the highest level of listening you can get, where you're not only taking in what the words the client says, the meanings of those words and statements, sentences, but also where they're coming from, what they intend, what they're not saying, and so on, which then gives rise to further curious questions. So dancing in the moment with the coachee or the client is, to me, what happens at level 3. And yes, now I get the connect with the iceberg model. You're actually going deeper than what's on the surface.
Okay. Nice, Suresh. Samir, you were going to share something?
Yeah, so this is the time when you are actually getting connected with the client now, and to see the world, to see the situation, to see the subject, or to even listen to the opinion, or to see the opinion, not listen to the opinion, or to see the opinion as the client does, right? And provide them with an emotional connection as the client shares that with you. So that is a relationship that you have as a coach with the client, right? But from the coach's perspective, it gives the coach an alternative perspective, I would say, and which helps to define the decision making. Yeah, where you are and what is expected, and you're able to correlate, you're able to connect to that paradigm of the client. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So
No, go ahead.
No, that's it. I was just trying to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think, the way I look at this is, and I'm using this simply here because in a real sense, that's exactly what's happening. At level 1, we are still on the surface, which is above the water. Yeah. And, when I'm at level 3, I'm really going behind the curtains, really going deep. Yeah. So very focused, as both of you rightly said, you're not just going on the words, you're going behind the words. Yeah, you're looking at the body language. You're looking at energy shifts. You're noticing how many times is he pausing? How many times is he hesitating? Is his energy level up, down? I think all of that starts to happen at this level. And every time the client will not talk about this, right? And, it's like those verbal hooks and cues or the non-verbal hooks and cues is what we are also picking up very deeply at this level. I think one more thing I have picked up at this level, and it's come with a little practice, and especially once I moved to the PCC journey with more knowledge, talking to more coaches, all of that, and my mentors, right? And happy to see how you guys feel about it. I also feel at this level now, the coach is also using some bit of his gut and intuition to figure out what's happening at the coach's end. Yeah. So, things like, I'm sensing this could be happening, and then you're playing it back to it. And I've actually tried using it in some of my conversations, and I wasn't at this place earlier, but I think post this PCC piece, I have started to practice this sometimes in the call, wherever I felt, my intuition or my gut is telling me something. And I think that is what also qualifies to come at that highest level of listening, when you're really going behind all of this and understanding. And I think also for me at this level, what also happens is you're also, as Suresh, you rightly said, dancing in the moment. What's happening between you and the coachee in the conversation at that time? I think that's also what's happening at this level, at level 3. That's my take on this. Yeah. So, yeah. Now, I think I'm putting up the competencies here. And
just a minute, Archana. I have another point to add here.
Sure.
I don't know where that level will fit in. What I've experienced is there is a level, I don't know, it's 3.2.3 or 2.5 or 3.5. There is a level in which, you are trying to connect, especially in the leadership coaching, you're trying to connect the leader with the future, right? And, how is it emerging and how is it developing on the future, aspect of it? Because, leaders need to develop that vision. So we normally use it in organizational changes and, something to do individual development of this leadership. So here, until now, you're talking about what has happened or what we know about it. But from here, you're taking it to the next level of taking this thought to the future.
Yeah.
And you're traveling in that in that space along with that client of yours.
Yeah.
Right. So this is something new which I experienced a couple of months back, but I didn't know how to caption it or put it.
Yeah. So, so to do that, I mean, if I was to correlate this to listening, Samir, the way I look at, so, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. So are you saying if I ask my client a question like, so, you're in this role now, yeah? So if you were to fast forward the next 4 years for yourself, what does that look like for you?
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about? Yeah. So in some sense, we are helping them visualize their future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that has seen a profound shift, I would say, and a true actually sense of knowing that future, both for the coach and the coachee, if you see it that way. And that was like a wow moment for me. I said, wow, taking from here to here.
So that's only telling me, Samir, you're doing good.
No.
Of course.
I'm just thinking loud when I talk to these people.
What do others feel? I mean, Suresh, Kapil, Renu, what do you guys feel? I mean, what you're hearing from Samir? I think the way I look at it, Samir, it's like it's a very heightened sense of awareness as a coach. Yeah, you're clearly, if I linked it to the listening, at what level were you at when you were able to take your client through that kind of a experience? Yeah, you're fully clued in. You're completely clued in. Yeah, and you're, I think at this level you're making a shift in their thinking because they're only thinking here and now. But you are kind of moving the thinking to a future state, and I think that's a very powerful kind of place to be in with your coaching.
Probably.
Yeah. So I think these are some competencies under listening actively, sub-competencies, right? So I think anybody wants to share your experience with this, because this is important. We can't, I mean, and a lot of level 2, level 3 that we have spoken about, yeah, we to kind of internalize this in a coaching conversation, it's difficult for us to be at level 1 and to be able to internalize this, right? So how do you guys look at this, and what has been your experience with these? I mean, especially when we look at 6.3, 6.4, anybody has a strength with any one of these? Anyone? Renu, any thoughts?
Okay, so I think teaching comes as an advantage to me here in coaching, definitely, yes. But yeah, if I talk about 6.3 and 6.4, as I have done so many sessions till now, and I got the feedback earlier that yes, you also need to listen to what emotions or energy shifts or non-verbal cues that are there. So I have started what we say intentionally, or if I say being conscious about it, that okay, am I looking into that part also or not? So that way also it is helping me in making my journey as a coach a better one, obviously, yes. And if I talk about observations, words, not interrupting, they are just the beginning. Like when we are just understanding the words, or just we are observing and we are not interrupting, we are summarizing. This is the initial thing that we are doing. But when we go to emotions, energy shifts, we are going to exploration of those beliefs, those values, and what actually the coach is going through. So that makes it a deeper listening. That is what I understand. Yeah.
Sure. Binay, anything? I didn't hear anything from you. Do you want to share something? Okay, so I think, I want to share an experience, and I think if I go to 6.3, yeah, now this is not something I was really focusing on initially in my journey, right? And I think as more experience started coming and I started focusing on the keywords the client is using sometimes, and sometimes they use it more than once. Yeah. Now, one odd time this is between my ACC into PCC. ACC, this was not happening. Yeah, because we are so focused on getting a solution for the client, right? But I think once I started my, sorry guys, I need to check. There was somebody trying to enter and it just popped up and went back. I can't see it again. How do you do that?
I think Neha was trying to enter, so when she tries to enter, you'll see her again.
Okay, probably I'll see her again. Okay, I think Sandhya was also trying to enter. Sure. So I think what I started doing was when I started to see some words being used more than once in a conversation and they could be coming at different times, right? So what I did was, I started picking that word up and putting it back to the client. This is 2 times I've heard you say this. Yeah. And why am I sharing this? What I realized was, had I not repeated it back, my client was actually moving forward, yeah, with another thought. But when I actually played it back to them, saying that by calling it out and noticing it, right, the entire conversation changed to something completely different. And it's happened more than once for me, right? And I think what I realized is that sometimes, and that is why the listening has to be at such a sharp level, that the clients are also coming confused and not realizing what are they experiencing and going through. But by repeating some of their words, yeah, you can, I think I was able to showcase them their world or their reality a little differently. That's been my experience. And I also want to give you a flip side. Recently, as a part of the coach mentoring, I was observing someone else's call. And with all due respect, it was a good call. Yeah. But I think one of the things I noticed, and me and that coach discussed it post the call, right? 3 or 4 times in the conversation, this client said that I'm not an ordinary person. I am not an ordinary person. Yeah. And this happened minimum 3 times. And of course, I caught that because I was in the other role. And I think when the person was listening to the call, the person didn't catch it on the call. Yeah. And I think there was a very key message the client was trying to give, though that conversation did end up on a good note and the client was happy. And when I asked the coach, I said, what do you think you could have done differently? And we were playing back the conversation again. He said, what? I should have explored this word. And somewhere in the end, the client actually came back and said, he says, I kept telling you I'm a little different. I am not an ordinary person. So, there was so many layers that could have got unfolded, had the person picked up on this word. So I think that is where I have found you picking up the keywords and playing it back to the clients very, very helpful. And I now see a difference of doing that in my conversations with clients. I mean, my experience. Anyone, how do you feel about this? I mean, your experience. This is how I'm analyzing it.
Yes, you're right. So this is something like, I realize that, our perception gets hardwired actually in a rigid way, especially when you have the new knowledge, getting built up on the prior knowledge, right? So it's something like, we walk after we learn to crawl, and then we run when we learn to walk, something like that. If you remember when we had that era of Blackberries, right? So we were typing effortlessly on our thumbs, on the mobile, because initially we fumbled over it, but even in an iPhone or in a Samsung, in a touchscreen device. But now we know that our brain remembers it, right? How is it done? And we naturally go to that place. So similarly, what happens in our coaching framework, I have seen that we size up people instantly, because we are relying on what we have heard or known about that person. Especially it happens in the second or the third contact, right? You picked up so much information about that person that you try and shadow that person, but in the end, you're making a perception about that person. And we stick to that perception forever and view every interaction with that person through this filter, right? And because filters are like unconscious mental frames, through which we are seeing them, right?
Sure.
And the sums and the problem is that while we are thinking that our first impression about the people are grounded solely in logic, actually it is not. Yeah, I found that, in reality, it's a jumbled mix of conscious and unconscious truth, fiction, prejudice, and all these biases keep playing up when you're interacting with that client, right? So right from the start, we are dealing with a very, very fictitious creation, right? And getting into that space of level 3, applying that level 3 and getting into that space, yeah, it's actually not a real person's job. It takes a big shift from moving from 1 to 3 or 2 to 3 or whatever it is, right? So this has been my experience and learnings. Actually, it has been tremendous.
I couldn't agree more, Samir, especially when you said how to make that shift from level 1 to level 3. But I can only tell you, in my own personal space, I have seen that difference where I would say I'm pretty much only at a 15. I know I don't want to sound modest, but I think I'm consciously not at level 1 now, because I saw the power of being at level 2 or level 3 and what difference it makes to the conversation, and it was not there initially, but I have consciously migrated to it and make an attempt to be there as far as possible. But yeah, it's an ongoing journey. It's not like, it's 100%. Not a destination at which you arrive.
100% with you, because what tends to happen with me used to happen is I used to do a mental boxing of people, without actually realizing it. It was a very unconscious decision, but I used to put them on gender, age, ethnicity, and education, and where did they come from, background, So it was totally dislodged, right? And because and it had a sequence. Wonderfully, it had a sequence. It started with gender, then it went to generation, which generation this person comes from. I should be dealing with that person, which nationality it comes from. So in that sequence, it always happened. But when I grew cautious about it, then it was a little, coming out of the box was a little difficult.
Sure.
That's the beauty of the coaching process, because it helps you to make the whole engagement very objective, non-judgmental, and completely agenda focused. So it weeds out a lot of these things that us people, especially in this geography, could get extremely biased, because the world around us is probably like that, and there are so many pressures that make us think in those sorts of ways. So very well said. I think that's something very all of us might have at some point of time been grappling with. And this journey actually helps us to become better listeners, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was just curious to know, I think all of this is very important, what we see on the slide, but I think one thing I want to share, which at least in my personal space, what I've noticed the change. Yeah. I have started becoming better at picking energy shifts and non-verbal clues. Yeah. Now this is a little bit of my facilitation work has helped me there, because when we talk so much about it, it's ingrained in the memory. And at least wherever, of course, you can only pick up if either you're in person with the person, or, you're doing it on a Zoom where the person is on camera, right? How do you, happy to know some things on what are some non-verbal clues? What are the other clues that you pick up? What are we actually listening to in that conversation? If you're operating at a level 2 and level 3, what are we actually listening to? We understand this in a simple sentence here on the competency, but in real time, what do you guys focus on from your experience?
I would say in my listening, I think listening is also a kind of a conversation, you know. The major conduit, I would say, is to build trust. One, create a safe and an honest environment with the client, and so that they're able to share their feelings and their thoughts, and then go on to how can I take them to reflect on the beliefs and the behavior that could be catalyst for their change, right? So what happens is, my listening is normally surrounded by three questions. Normally I have it in my mind, like how can I best help the speaker through this, wherever they are, right? And then second is, how can I allow the client to be to allow myself to be a sounding board to a client, right? And the third thing is, how can I invoke a sense of ownership by my listening? How can I invoke that in the client, which gives the client the direction to go and explore in that space? Yeah. So primarily it evolves around that, and this is how I've seen that shift coming or experienced that shift, which is, yeah.
Interesting. Sandhya, I think you joined a little late. You told me anything you want to share? Bene told me he's got a bad throat, so he's on a listening mode. So is
No,
Archana.
Archana, I think I'm just soaking in all that is being shared. I'm just in and out, so
Sure.
I'm just listening in. But I think I really agree to what Samir was saying, and it's a journey. And I think for me, this part, especially about listening, is something that has grown, that has evolved, and will continue to do so. And every day, I think, is, and you also experiment with it, and you also actively engage in this with at home. It's not just in that coaching space; it also extends beyond. So you see the benefits of doing that, even in other walks of life, and that's really been rewarding. So yeah, thanks, Archana.
Sure. So I want to just share one experience of this was live. This was pre-COVID. And I was not at a PCC level then, I was at an ACC level. But I think through experience, I don't know how I picked it up, and that actually changed the conversation flavor completely. So I was live with the client, and this is talking about 6.3 and 6.4 in combination. And suddenly I saw the client, the client was actually sitting very leaning forward, all of that, and was pleasantly enjoying the conversation, participative and all of that. And I think a while later, I saw the client, I think 20, 25 minutes into the conversation, he started and sat in a very relaxed posture with his arms and his side angle towards me. So, I was not like, I was still new to coaching, and I didn't know any of this at that point of time, or not to that extent. And I just saw freckles on his forehead. Yeah, it started off well, and then I suddenly see him in a very relaxed posture. And I just called it out, and I said, I can notice that you have these freckles on your forehead. What's happening? So he said, good. Now I'm actually getting bored. And I was like, I didn't know how to deal with it, so I said, okay. I said, so you want me to do anything differently? He said, no, I think there's no problem with you, but I am suddenly now distracted with a meeting which is coming up next, so I think that was my moment of truth. Yeah, I had not looked at any of these competencies, but that was my moment of truth. Of course, we called it off and we met again, right? But for me, what I realized in that conversation with my client was that sometimes they're not saying it, and the moment his body posture changed, to a very relaxed, he was really listening to me very intently, forward body movement, genuinely interested. And I just saw him change his complete stance towards me. And I just didn't know what was happening. And I think whatever came to my mind, and I just happened to ask him this question. And in some sense, by asking that question, it helped me to get to what was he really feeling in that moment. Yeah. And that was the day I realized, and because it worked for me, now it could have backfired as well. Because in that conversation, it worked for me. I have become very attuned to noticing this now in my conversations with clients. So it's helped me in that sense. It could have backfired, but it was to my advantage. Of course, the conversation didn't go further that day, but yeah. And that's when I realized there is power in looking at all what they are saying by not just using the words. So, you're also listening to what is not being said. This was a classical example of that for me in that conversation, So, I mean, I just want to, we are pretty much towards the end. And I think because it's all about listening, I think besides what we saw there, what are we really listening to as coaches? What do you think? What are those finer nuances we need to kind of focus on? Like I said, I really put a lot of focus on the verbal cues now. Yeah, not that other things are not important, but this actually, I pick up a little faster than the other things. Yeah, now it's a bias or I don't know what it is, but this is what's happening in my journey. What are we listening to? What happens if the client's tone changes, guys? Sorry, Sameer, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
No,
I'm saying, question.
What happens if the client's tone changes? How do you kind of address this in a session? What do you guys do?
So I think once I had this, when the client was hell-bent on a terminology called servant leadership. Yeah. So it was a choking point for me. It actually was a choking point. It was not a stale moment, but it was a choking point for me because I didn't have anywhere to go. So I just asked him in a very simple way. I said, how do you define leadership? Right? And is it got to do with, I'm just forgetting, is it character? Is it behavior? Is it personality? Is it relationship? Is it what? Right? And so he says, no, it's about servant leadership. I said, what is the characteristic of servant leadership? How do you understand leadership? So he was jumping from this thing, and ultimately he said, I think servant leadership is the basic characteristic of a servant leadership is listening. Yeah, and I think he got a very indirect message, which he told me much later. That was a good shut-up call from you, but actually you got me back to where I was supposed to be. So I think, we get into this kind of a situation where, are you listening to give feedback? Are you listening to build up trust? Are you listening to, to be consciously aware, to be more focused on the client? Yeah. This is how I look at it. How should I be listening to? And especially those 3 questions which I just mentioned, that these are the areas that I listen to.
Sure. Interesting. Anyone else? So, okay. Yeah, so Anshuli is writing, she's probably got a bad throat. So she's saying, listen and be with the flow. Yeah, absolutely. So be with the flow, you're pretty much dancing in the moment, but there are some things I'm listening to now post the PCC journey very consciously. There's no reason for it, but I think it just, my focus just goes there when I see it happening in a call. So I do look at, so if the client started the call and he was very enthusiastic, right? And now suddenly I see the whole tonality has changed. So I kind of played back at least one time to say, when we started, you sounded a lot more energetic. Yeah, and of course, it could be an assumption, but I'm only using it at a time when I'm actually seeing that energy change completely in the conversation. Yeah, is what's happening, or is everything okay there? And then they either acknowledge it to say, no, everything is okay, or, and there are times when I've asked it, I've got different responses. Yeah, I'm actually thinking, can you give me some time? Some of those things. So I think I specifically watch out for tonality. And what I also sometimes watch out for is, sometimes they're speaking very fast and suddenly their pace will come down. So I don't know if there is merit in exploring some bit of that. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because that's all again coming under listening.
So at the end of it, I mean, we all look at it that it should become a more of an unconscious competence. Yeah.
Yeah.
That it becomes an integral.
Sure. Okay, so I think just very quickly to sum it up, I think that's what pretty much I have today. I think some of the other things, if we look at this competency is in a conversation, you are listening out for this as well, right? As coaches. Yeah, what are they good at? What are some of their key skills, some achievements? Of course, acknowledge that. That's also one of the competencies, where we are acknowledging their talents and all of that, right? What's coming in their way and picking up those finer nuances and which could be coming through some keywords. Like, in my example, when I shared it, the lady kept saying 2-3 times, I'm not an ordinary person. That's not who I am. And for that, in that conversation, for some reason, the coach could not pick that up, and he realized it later when he listened to the call one more time. Yeah. Are there some themes or patterns that are emerging that constantly there's a particular way they are looking at themselves, right? I think those are some things to watch out for specifically. Yeah. And just some example of, I'm always messing up on this. I don't think I never do anything right. So there's a high probability they're either making an assumption, yeah, or this is something as a coach, we could probably come in and constructively challenge by asking the right question at that point of time. So that is what I have for the session today. So anything that resonated with you from this last 40-45 minutes, which was different or something which has got revalidated for you?
I was just thinking that everybody needs someone to listen to them. Everybody needs a listening ear. Not everybody gets a listening ear, and especially when they need it. What better than to have a coach listen to them and listen to them with care, compassion, and just provide them that listening ear. So it's a wonderful gift to actually have someone listen to you, and that's the gift that coaches give their clients or anybody who they choose to listen to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Suresh.
So for me, Archana, I really like the part where you spoke about that client of yours, where he kept saying that thing about himself, that he's not, what was the line that he kept saying?
I'm not an ordinary person.
I'm not an ordinary person. Yes. Now, this is something that, if you listen attentively, if you're tuned into the client, it's a beautiful thing to catch on and explore. So that's something that I was thinking about and seeing what have I missed like this. So that's something that stands out for me, Archana.
Okay, thank you. One last thing I want to share, it's coming from a personal experience. And I keep saying this because I saw some bit of me changing during this journey from an ACC to a PCC. So of course, we all know this, the listening talking ratio is 70-30. As coaches, we're doing 30% talking and, 80 to 70% is when we are listening to our coaches or our clients, right? And I don't think I was on that number at the ACC journey. I was somewhere 50-50, yeah? And when I would listen back to my calls, what I noticed that, of course, we're supposed to do paraphrasing and summarizing, but I was doing too much of that, yeah? And I think the transition that also happened for me personally was to listen more. I started asking shorter, crisper questions. Yeah. The same questions which were longish initially, I made an attempt to kind of narrow them down as much as possible. Don't not summarize so much and allow my client to do most of the talking. Because that was a challenge area for me as a coach initially. And I think with a lot of feedback, I was blessed to have some very good mentors, right, who gave me very candid feedback. And I think I I'm not there. I'm not 100% there. But I made a very conscious attempt to iron out some of these things that I was grappling with. And of course, there is still a lot more work to do. But I saw the benefit of fine-tuning it, condensing it, summarizing it, not doing so much paraphrasing, asking shorter questions. That really kind of added to my ability to listen at a higher level with my client. I mean, that's my personal experience there in terms of how I saw the shift between what was I doing at ACC and what I started doing differently at a PCC. So that's what I wanted to share.
Great.
Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so as I always read about this competency, I always relate it to Lord Ganesha and having 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we all have that only. So we should listen more and talk less. And it resonates with me a lot because when I think about my journey as into teaching, and I feel that even if students, if they are also given that ear, a listening ear, I think because they are into that mode, always being fed, right? So they can't open up, or they don't speak up much, or they are not listened to, maybe due to any of the reasons can be there in the education system. But yes, if we do that with the children also, so I think it will be a much more benefited kind of a thing for them. So this is how I relate here.
Sure. Good example. I like the analogy of Ganesha, Renu. Okay.
Loved all your personal examples, Archana. Very open, honest examples, and a lot of them resonated with me and my journey as well. So thank you very much for that lovely facilitation.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. It means a lot, and appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
It was a
Thank
great
you.
time for us. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You'll have to stop the recording, Archana.